And congratulations on a really great performance. I think especially the intonation was very, very good throughout, which is really difficult in this kind of music. But the main aspect of your playing that I think that we could work on this morning is about balance. And I think maybe my colleagues would agree that this is inherently troublesome for balance, because if you look at the score, the parts are quite close together most of the time in the range. And this makes it very difficult to delineate, especially the inner voices in the cello, and even sometimes the first violin melody can get lost if all the notes are very close together in terms of register. What do you guys do now in your rehearsals to combat this aspect of the music? Or have you thought about it?
I think it's something we need to work on more.
Okay. My impression now is that when you think something's important and you think your part is less important, that the initial impetus is just to go over the fingerboard or to play with less contact, which I think actually hurts you in the long run. Because what I thought most of the time is that everything was kind of, in terms of, this goes along with some other things I noticed, in terms of energy throughout, it was all kind of in the middle register as well, because there was kind of this tendency not to go towards the bridge, especially when you needed to. You'd be surprised even for some of the inner voice parts with the really rhythmical figures, those things, if they have lots of articulation, are really, really close to the bridge. Even if you're playing piano, really helps the whole texture become just more clear. Like for instance, towards the end, like around L, we have a lot of different things going on at the same time. I wonder if we could just play this passage again at L one more time until around 281 or so, something like that. And really think about what is your role in that moment. What are the different roles that you can have, basically in any piece of quartet? Like somebody's playing the melody. What else is there? The bass, right. Right, you could be a rhythmical motor as an inner voice, or as the cello, or sometimes as the first violin. You could also be a counter melody, so that it's maybe something new. We've heard the melody before, so maybe this counter melody needs to be really well heard. Or you could just be pure harmony. And so this is how you have to think through each passage. You could even write in your music, like, this is my role right now. I think for the first violin, it's a little bit more similar throughout in terms of what your role is, but for the other three, it's always changing. And it's so important to know at any one moment which mask you're wearing, which character are you in this play that you're putting on. So let's start at L and just try to think about that and let's see what happens. And just to give you a clue, if you think that you're important, if you think your part needs to be heard, which everybody's part needs to be heard, try to focus on articulation to achieve that purpose, whether it's shorter or whether you need to be lyrical and actually have less articulation. That contrast in any one given moment is really what helps delineate good balance. very good. Like, for instance, 266 is where it really gets, let's just hear each part at 266 so everybody can understand the amount of notes that are going on here and how it's very difficult to get them all heard at the same time.
It's the fifth bar of L.
Fifth bar of L, sorry. Yeah. So just first violin. Good. Okay, you started a little bit afterward, but it's fine. Okay. Now, second violin. Good. Do you mind starting at the fifth bar of L just so we can hear your... Yeah, that's right. Okay, so what do we have there, basically? What are your two roles right there?
To both for articulation and support the...
No, I mean, are you melody, harmony?
Is it not a melody?
It's kind of a counter melody in a way. Yes, okay. And yours is the melody. Good, now let's hear viola. This is a great viola part. Good. Yes, okay, exactly. Right. Good, and cello. Okay, now, we didn't hear these two parts, I think. This is the main thing. So let's try and build it up from, you guys are really the kind of the rhythmical engine here. Let's just have the two of you. And basically, for articulation, if you're under a slur, how can we get the articulation? Since we can't use the bow to make the articulation. Right, and so that's knocking down the fingers, right? But also with the bow, what can we do to enhance that as well?
Because we do have the hair king.
The bow speed, exactly. But if you're playing piano, piano does not mean to play over the fingerboard. No composer ever expected that. So I would say just try to play at least the middle between the bridge and the fingerboard, or even closer to the bridge. And just make the crescendo by using more bow speed. And then for your part, what can we do to make it really stand out in the texture?
Both left-hand articulation and closer to the bridge.
Yes, like an insane amount of articulation. I think one of our mentors told us that one of the first Schubert cello quintets he ever played was with a very experienced quartet cellist. And he thought sitting next to him, that sounds horrible. What is he doing? It's just like the whole way through. And apparently in the hall, it sounded glorious. So I think the lower, almost like the lower your register is, the more articulation you have to have at all times. Just do an obnoxious amount, and we'll see.
And just one thing to add, Dvorak's very specific in these couple bars about when he arrives at forte in each of your parts. And I think we could exaggerate that a little bit because you end up on the downbeat, you're slightly after maybe the second beat or... So really exaggerate that because he's very specific about this.
Right from your first note, I don't hear it. So you have to go really close to the bridge, yeah. Okay, and talking about contact point, do you think this is an acceptable contact point based on our discussion thus far? No.
It's very specific. So, but with these noodles, I hear you start to smack the fingerboard when it gets loud, and that's the part we're actually going to hear anyway. So I think especially when it starts, when it's like whispering, whenever you're playing pianissimo, you have to feel like you're working even harder actually than when you're playing loud. It's a very counterintuitive thing, I think, for how most of us are trained. But the quieter it is, the more intense you have to be in your playing.
Try again. Getting there? Maybe some help from our cellist.
Can I hear that one more time?
Good. But I don't really hear enough of a difference between the piano and the forte.
I agree.
Oh, good.
And I would say that the piano doesn't need to be less.
Right. Because keeping in perspective, so this is the interesting thing about Dvorak is that he has such a range, and it's actually part of the joy of playing his music is that you go from these totally different levels. In this particular spot, we've come up from pianissimo. So keeping that in mind, and also realizing that, yes, this is kind of the motor rhythm, cha, cha, but it's also highlighting the primary line, which is not on the beats, right? Da dee da dee. It's always on the off beats. So if we accentuate the major beats, that actually gets highlighted. So thinking of it also in those terms, how do I help my colleagues bring out what's inherently interesting in their part by doing more of what is interesting in my part?
Even now, it's much better. We lose a little bit of you when you go to your lowest point in the piano. Think even more articulation as you get softer, because that's the only thing that's gonna project.
Yeah, and just, get rid of the, because your part really is not lyrical. I think we can agree on that, right? It's not yum bum ba bum bum ba bum bum. Leave the lyricism to second violin. So dum ba bum bum ba bum bum ba bum.
And from the way everyone's singing it, I'm guessing it could be lower in the bow generally to keep a little bit of lift, a yum ba dum, and to keep the crisp articulation. I think sometimes when you drift too much to the upper half, it gets a little too lyrical.
Much better. Great. Can we add the other two now?
Yes.
Let's hear just the two of you actually together. Good. Which notes are important to vibrate in the melody?
It could be a trick question.
Yeah, all the notes. Good, very good. Now, I'm not advocating that they're all vibrated the same, but if you ever heard an opera singer go, oh, 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 in the same phrase, you would think that this was like some really modern opera or a very poor singer. And so in order to sustain any kind of vocal line, we have to maintain, I mean, if you played it all non-vibrato, that would be one thing. But since you're not, and you're electing to use vibrato, every single note has to be connected to the next with even well-phrased vibrato.
Can we actually just slow it down
Yeah.
so that we can really highlight what's, again, interesting about this part? It's da, dee, da, go back to E, then up to G sharp, back to E, then to the B, then back to the E, then to the C sharp. So we really have to hear that, and we can connect that way so that our ear hears where we started. So we have to hear the E, ba, ti, ya, P, ya, ya, so that you take us on that journey and you feel the line just in the intervals. So let's just really slowly the melody. Beautiful. Now the two of you in tempo. In tempo.
Good. It's a really nitpicky detail that's very excellent, but your vibrato is consistently intense on each of those reaching notes that Estelle's talking about. So maybe, I would say, since it's already at its max amplitude and intensity by the F sharp, try to see if you can scale it back from the F sharp and really use that vibrato for the B and then the C sharp. Beautiful. Very beautiful. Can we put it all together? By the way, this is the way you should work. You should very rarely all four be playing at the same time. Really listen to each other and be each other's teachers. so that you take the components that are most similar and put them together. You could have 3 of you playing even at once, and the person who has the least amount going on in that particular moment can go to the back of the room if you have the luxury of having a space like this to rehearse in. Or you can go in the practice room like this against the wall and really get the perspective from outside the group is very valuable.
And we've worked on 3 bars for I don't know how many minutes. But on the plus side, it will apply to everything else that you do. Your ears will immediately pick up, oh wait, this is what I have to do here. This is my role here. Oh, that's not really coming out. So it becomes a faster process. But at first, you know, it kind of, you got to get the gears going, and then your ears just kind of open up. And you start to hear all the different colors and characters and the roles just in a few bars. Sorry, go ahead.
What do you think?
From an audience perspective, I don't know if everybody agrees, but I could have used a little bit more of the second violin could be a little bit more highlighted. And I don't think necessarily you need to play more, but everybody needs to play a little bit less. Not less intensely, but in volume, a little bit less. One more time.
Sorry, can you stand up and play it once? Yeah, stand up.
It's your moment.
It's your concerto. No, concerto stance. Like, be proud. There we go.
I don't.
I tried.
So it's a really funny thing that when we sit down, we lose like half of the sound that we're capable of producing just because of our physical stature. So it's very valuable for the upper 3 voices to practice standing up very often and then immediately sit down and see if you can get that same quality of sound. It also has to do with your posture. Make sure that if you rock back, and can I borrow your chair? I have to kind of demonstrate. You know, you have these bones that you sit on. They're called your sits bones. And if you rock back and forth, you can kind of feel them. And make sure that that's kind of your foundation and it's connecting with the chair and that your legs are right out in front of you. Like, for instance, this chair is a little bit too low for me because you see that my knee is higher than my hip. It should never really be like that. And then feel like you have a string pulling you up, like a puppet, like a marionette. And this is good posture and will really help you get the biggest sound possible. If you're ever in a chair that's too low, by the way, you can bring this leg back, and this helps you feel more connected with the chair. So just a little.
And I think going along with what Ryan's saying, I think this was, I don't know why this happened to me, but when I first started playing the quartet, I'm like, oh, I need to be such a sensitive chamber musician, and then didn't play the violin like I normally play it in my solo playing. And I think it's really important to bring that type of solo playing to the quartet. I mean, this is a large space. You got to put out a lot of sound. So, I mean, just apply that same type of playing that you've all been taught to the quartet as well.
What was interesting when you stood up to play your concerto, I noticed that what you did very sensitively in your part, da, 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 is that the expressivity of your 8th notes was tempered slightly to highlight her line. And that's just natural instincts that you guys have because you're really fantastic players. But really clue into that. It's funny how visually, suddenly you see somebody stand up and you say, "Oh, okay, I'm with them. I'm with her. You know, I'm doing what I'm doing for the group, for the solo, for the lines." But don't be afraid to do that. Don't go into autopilot and it has to be this sound every time. It has to be this kind of vibrato all the time. Just be careful with that, I would say. But this is definitely in the right direction. Yeah.
Try it one more time? And then we'll go to another passage, we promise. very good thing. Then one other thing, so just in general, there are moments when you're all doing different things. We just spoke about that. But there are moments when you really need to have a very great quartet sound. I think even the beginning is a good example. And if you play over the fingerboard, you lose a lot of what I like to call glue. Glue actually manifests itself under your ear as that sound, that extraneous noise sound that sometimes under our ear sounds a little bit too much, and then we tend to play lighter and fluffier so that under our ear it sounds nice, but out in the hall it just sounds like lukewarm bathwater. It doesn't really, if that had a sound. But what I would encourage you to do is always feel like you're pulling the bow, that you never feel like you're just easily moving it across the string, because the bow requires a lot of imagination, the bow arm, because it's not like the left hand where you can see all the mechanisms working. A lot of it is just like under the skin, what's happening. And I find that imagery helps me the most in regard to creating colors and stuff in my right arm. So I always use this analogy that you have a rope tied to the end of your bow on either end, and on the other side of the rope is the Titanic at the bottom of the ocean, and you're dredging it up from the ocean. Even if you're playing piano or pianissimo, even in these opening chords, you have to feel that kind of resistance in order for the sounds to kind of come together in the middle and form that amazing fifth sound that people love when they listen to string quartet.
I would actually say, especially in piano and pianissimo, I think that's where we lost that quality the most, actually.
You want to try the opening? Can we just have second violin and viola? Can I have more second violin right from the beginning? This almost sounds like Schubert cello quintet opening. And what's the plan for vibrato? What's the plan for the vibrato? Do you have a plan? Hope for the best? Okay, make up a plan now. Oh, you can talk about it. Or one of you leads. What do you want to achieve in this opening? Let's start with that. What kind of atmosphere are we trying to create? Or what's changing? Anybody can answer. From first to second bar to third bar, what's changing? More or less intense?
The intensity is more.
Okay, good. So how can vibrato aid that cause?
I don't know. I mean,
You do know. You guys have played your instruments for how long?
the speed and
Yes. What about the speed?
Slower, faster.
Faster, yes. That's what you meant to say, I know. So try from the beginning, and where exactly is the speed starting to get faster? Which measure? Second measure, okay, but is it immediately faster or gradually getting faster and arriving in the third measure with the most? This is very important to discuss this stuff out in words, because sometimes we even instinctually do the same thing, but just to make the idea even clearer, we say to ourselves, okay, that sounded pretty good, but just to be sure, this is our plan, right? And then once we establish that in words somehow, it's really concrete and it's there every time. Try that idea. And let's let you lead for the intensity. So just stare down her left hand. Okay, those of you who are listening, do you like that better? Is it good? Anything that can be improved? Or it's perfect? Good. Okay, it's very important to tell your colleagues when you're working on something that is it better or is it worse before you say, and now can you do this? Because otherwise you don't make as much progress because you're confused as to whether or not that was actually effective. So that was very, very good. Now can we add everybody? Everyone has to start exactly together, and the sound has to be immediately. Almost imagine that there's a little bit of articulation that you all are doing right together.
What is everyone's dynamic here? Oh, two different dynamics. You guys are pianissimo, you're piano.
And it's
So
also
this is-
piano espressivo, and I think
so
that's
you-
clearly meant to be a substantial level above.
So this would be an instance where you should vibrate from the beginning while they don't, so then it's actually more clear. Good. Can you pull right from the first note a little bit more? Little more drag.
And
Yeah.
one more thing. If I was sitting in this part of the audience, I would want my money back because I can't hear or see you play.
yeah.
So you're playing. They're getting their money's worth, but these people are. Sorry, move your chair.
They're a
There
little
we go.
shortchanged.
Yeah. There we go. Better, right?
No, breathe together. Yeah,
Good.
so go ahead.
Sorry, good, this is all going in the right direction. Can we, in the third bar, I just feel like that should be, there should be more impact on that. It feels like you're gingerly dipping your toe in the water, and then you come away from it. It should really be strong. Da dee da dee, ya da 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 dee ta dee. That's where you twist the knife and the da da. Just play with that chord right there, all on a down bow. Everybody, just hold the chord. And played with sustained, like really full. Sustain, sustain. Play the first chord. Play the first chord. Just hold the first beat of the very beginning of the. Just hold. Now the third bar, downbeat, sustained. No. Now the third bar, downbeat. Good. So that should be. So we start. You have to go there. You have to go to the extreme. Do more. Can you try something for me? I know you're all trying to do that on an up for the first two bars. Can you start it like maybe halfway in the? I don't know. You guys can tell them. Halfway through the bow on the down, just so that you have enough leeway to get to the right dynamic.
So she's saying two bows in the first note, starting down bow.
And can we get more? Can we do the same thing once more and more from you?
More of the E flat on the third bar.
Yes. Yeah.
Go to the bridge. Good. That's much better. Thank you, guys. It was really a pleasure to hear you. It sounds really terrific.
really fantastic things going on, and what an amazing piece too, right? There's so much youth drama, angst, intensity, passion, burning 18-year-old love drama, like wild, schizophrenic, so happy and then so painfully sad and traumatic, and you guys are capturing a lot of that very well. What I actually want to harp on a little bit after saying all of these dramatic things is actually details, and specifically dynamics, actually, because he is very specific about the dynamics. And without looking at the music, what's the loudest and the softest dynamic that he gives through the piece? Fortissimo, pianissimo. Who's another really, really famous quartet composer that has exactly the same dynamic structure? Is that generally speaking? Exactly. Okay, excellent. So at least how we like to begin interpreting these Beethovenian dynamic structures is that anytime you have fortissimo or pianissimo, so the maximum extreme range, there's always a specific reason. And it's always something very special. And it might be different every time. But as a starting point, I would encourage you, whenever you see those dynamics, to ask yourself, okay, why is that there? He means something really, really specific with this. And then along with that, in a more practical sense, I think the difference between forte and fortissimo and the difference between piano and pianissimo can be much greater than what you guys are doing right now. Whereas, and this is a little bit counterintuitive as a musician, because you see the marking piano, you see the P in your music, and then you see the F for forte. These can, I think, actually be slightly closer together sometimes than what you guys are doing. We see those as different letters, and often, we play piano over the fingerboard and then we blast forte, but then there's not really a whole lot of room to make the difference for actually the most dramatic of spots. So actually, if we could start from the beginning, so we won't give away to the audience where the first pianissimo is, but I think that could be more immediate and more of like you should take our breath away a little bit with that pianissimo color. So let's take it from the top again and really, really go for something special on that pianissimo. And the only other detail I want to give, this is very tricky opening and you guys play it very well. Last notes before rests, make sure you sustain them long enough that your counting subdivisions doesn't get thrown out of whack in the rests. So it's because if you cut the note short and then the rest is too short, somehow as an audience member, our internal clock gets a little anxious and we get nervous in an opening that's actually very, at least for the first couple bars, very relaxing and warm, right? All right, so let's take it from the beginning. So for me, at least standing here, the difference is not nearly enough somehow on the pianissimo. So how are you trying technically on your instruments to achieve the sound on the pianissimo? Do you have a specific plan?
More of a floating bow.
Okay. So if you're going for more of a floaty bow on the pianissimo, then none of you have nearly enough bow to accomplish that, because actually you have to slow down your bows currently for the pianissimo. So make sure you're very diligent about really saving leading up to that. Maybe you could just go right on, how about just on the pickup to the bar before the pianissimo? Because I feel like the audience probably still doesn't actually know where it is. So let's really overdo it once and show them right from there.
Can you guys play at once on a new bow? Da, 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 and change the bow on the pianissimo once, just so you get the sound in your ear, because you still don't have nearly enough bow.
So actually, that is an option, and we have performed this piece many times with that bowing, and then eventually we went back to playing it in one bow. But as long as you're super, super legato to respect what the marking is in the score, this is an option. And on the very first try, it did sound much more successful. So only do the other bowing if you can achieve it with this level of excellence. We spend so much time working and rehearsing and practicing, and sometimes if we can make a slight change and it works perfectly on the first try, we should keep it that way. Okay, now from the very beginning, what's the first character word that would come to mind for what you're going for? If you had to assign, maybe from somebody else, you've been really good about answering everything. Sorry? Prayer-like, okay. I think somehow your physical approach to leading this together is a little bit too rhythmic in nature, actually. Like I see you guys moving to the quarter beat, and somehow it's losing the vocal nature of this prayer-like character. So I totally understand what you're going for. You're trying to give a really clear rhythm because it's very difficult to actually play together, right? So, but maybe if you guys really focus on breathing in perfect unison and breathe in the rhythm, then you actually don't have to show it quite as much, and it might even be more together. Can we give it a shot?
Jeremy's trying to say is don't give a separate motion with your instrument. You breathing in and breathing out is going to be enough motion.
Mm-hmm. Can you guys actually, I'm sorry to do this, can you sing it together once? And as you do it, if you sing the wrong pitches, whatever, it doesn't even matter, but as you do it, particularly pay attention to the breath in before singing the first note, and take that breath perfectly together, and notice how when you breathe in, your lungs expand, and that's what Ryan's talking about. If you, I'm not going to cue anything, but just if I breathe, there's a natural cue that happens. So if you breathe perfectly together, that should take care of itself. But just one time, just sing the first 4 measures.
We won't judge you.
Don't be shy about the breath. Really be physically open, and you kind of did the same thing as when you play a little bit, and we do this sometimes too. We cue together, and then halfway through the cue, we all look at the music. So really, this is such a. I really agree with your prayer word, but really share it with each other, and I think the audience will really enjoy that too. So it's like a shared experience that you're sending out to your audience.
And pitches don't matter. It's really just phrasing intention. That's what
exactly.
we want to hear. I think you guys have played this enough together that you don't need to look at each other for each beat. I see you conducting with your heads. And this is also what I feel when you're playing it, that it's really beat by beat. Can you close your eyes once and sing it together and really just rely on your ears to feel the cue?
So now you'll have to breathe even louder.
Yes. Okay, do you have a metronome marking that you guys have decided on for this opening?
Not for the opening.
Do you practice it with a metronome ever?
Done it a couple times.
A couple times. You don't have the same pulse at all, and that's what's evident, and that's why you feel like you're all walking on eggshells in terms of placement of the. When you're in quartet, you really have to feel like you can play very securely your own line as if no one else was playing. Like you have to feel like, same way when you play like solo Bach or something, like you're not relying on anybody else to connect with the rhythm or whatever, and that helps so much with the sound and expression than if you feel like, oh, I have to be together with this person and this person and this person, and then you start to get, all the worry makes you start to close up like this, and the phrasing's not good and the sound's not good, and the only way to achieve that is to really have a unified pulse that you can really count on, that's totally predictable every time. not for the audience, but for you as a quartet. And the only way to achieve that really is to have a standardized metronome marking that you each practice your individual part at. This is really, really crucial. So what I would do is we listen to a number of recordings by very reputable groups and clock out their metronome markings. And then if you took the average or the interpretation you like the most, and you write that down and you bring it to rehearsal, and then you try out all these different metronome markings, and hopefully you can come on to a decision that you like this particular marking or this range between 62 to 64 that you really, really like, and you write it here on the top of your page, and that way it will really guide your practice a lot, because this is a very, very hard opening that we still work on all the time, even though it's the first piece we ever played together as a quartet. And I think really, really helpful for listening, once you're established with the pulse, is to practice either with your chairs facing the other way so you can't see each other for the visual cues and you really have to use your ears, or to play with your eyes closed or without the stands, all kinds of things.
But I think you guys will be pleasantly shocked after going home and practicing all at the same marking when you come back together how many things don't need to be rehearsed anymore. And this is not to say that all music has to be straight and metronomic. You can, of course, have rubato, take a little bit of time here, move it forward somewhere else. But if your starting point is from a point of unified internal clock, then, and also, of course, for the allegro section as well, then it's amazing how much of the work takes care of itself at that point. So now, also, once you have done that step, I think the next thing with this opening is to really, instead of trying to lead by showing beats, to actually lead with the phrasing. If there's an inevitability of where the next note is going to come because of how we're phrasing with the bow, how we're vibrating and leading to the next note, then it's more of, oh, of course that change happened exactly there, as opposed to like, oh God, oh God, oh God, I'm physically tensing because I don't know when the next note is going to come. And we've been there with this opening as well, so this is being empathetic.
Yeah, and actually Mendelssohn gives us a tool to play that third beat of the first bar together, in that he writes this hairpin, and it's missing a little bit right now, or it's missing, not just a little bit, it's missing. And I think we can really use our vibrato to show the audience that swell and kind of that emotional impact of that marking. And if when we do it next time, I think 95% of all quartets play a quarter note at the beginning of this piece. They go, do, fa, mi, do, but it's actually an eighth note. So, do, fa, mi, do. So, could we incorporate those two small details?
Can we actually just hear first violin alone so we get an idea for the phrasing? Okay, you all agree? Anything you want to change? Perfect.
A little bit more.
Sorry, what was that?
More vibrato for the swell.
More vibrato through the hairpin. Okay.
What about the first note?
Vibrato or no vibrato on the first note? There's only one answer. Yes.
What does it do to the character when you don't vibrate?
It's kind of like a little cold to me.
Yeah, yeah, totally, yeah, exactly.
And what is this piece about?
Do you know the story? Do you know da da dee? Do you know what the words are to that? Oh, okay. So briefly, Mendelssohn was 18 and he was in love. And he wrote a song where he's asking his lover, is it true that you love me? And the words are, is it true? This is literally taken from, this is a quotation from a song that he wrote, and he put it in, so the subtitle of this is Es das wahr in German, is it true? So this is very, very important to know for the sentiment of the entire work. And if you haven't heard the entire work, spoiler alert, it doesn't end in the same kind of dramatic fashion as the first movement. It brings back the opening theme again. So we're led to believe that
Maybe there's some hope for him.
Exactly.
Not so sure through a lot of this first movement.
So all that to say, you should probably vibrate the first note.
And this is all just standard homework that you have to do before you learn any piece. So that's a really important aspect of this entire work. It really dictates how you interpret it. So from now on, before you start to learn any piece, these are the details you have to know. And it makes a little more sense now, the way that you guys, well, I can touch on that later. But with that in mind, can you play the opening one more time? Just on your own.
Is it still pianissimo there?
Why did it, for what technical reason did it get a lot louder? Exactly. So, of course, as musicians, we always need to be as expressive as possible and in the moment, but then on the other side, we always have, especially in chamber music, have to be so practical about especially how we use the bow at all times. And with the other bowing, the exact same thing happens, so I think it's built in a little bit. And once again, it goes back to pianissimo dynamics, just it's really there for a reason and treat it very carefully. I did find throughout, actually, that when pianissimo was written, it was generally always a level too much, and then you guys would leave it too soon. So always keep that in mind. One more time from the beginning, and I'd love it if you guys would try this concept that we refer to as leading and following, where so you'll be initiating the cue, but as you initiate the cue, feel like you're also following them. Now, as you guys are following the cue, feel like you're leading him, because if I'm following you, I'm gonna be behind you all the time, right? So you guys need to work doubly hard to be anticipating and leading him, and then they're like a mirror of your cue. They're a reflection of what you're actually doing. So then you need to follow that.
And actually, it's funny that you mentioned a mirror. I actually sometimes practice the cue that I'm going to give to start a piece in front of a mirror, because I can see if the cue is making sense and if I would actually be able to follow it. So you'll look, if somebody peers into your practice room, it's going to look a little strange, but I would highly recommend practicing like that.
And why don't you guys play the whole opening now? We've been talking and stopping a lot. But so from when it says pianissimo, absolutely no crescendo until where the C is of the crescendo marking. So the bow speed
And contact.
has to stay exactly the same in the contact point after the pianissimo, so you don't kick the next note. And just but I'm using technical terms, but really stay in that beautiful moment that he sets up and don't give it away. So leading and following and special pianissimo. Wait, but what dynamic is it right where you got to?
And is it a supergo change?
Yeah, it sounds exactly the same as the bar before. So somehow, am I singing? Yeah, I did sing it in the right And it has to be dramatic there. It's not for granted. Once again, pianissimo and piano, they look like really similar dynamics, but I think it's really something that needs to be more dramatic, actually, with how it's printed. Now, to go back to the beginning, the ensemble was fantastic.
Much better.
It was almost perfectly together through the whole opening now, and I think it was just a conceptual thing. And the only two little things that weren't together, I think once you've individually practiced at the same metronome speed, those are the ones that are just going to go away.
Yeah.
But the cue was fantastic, and
Yeah, and you get to answer our question, kind of. We go, is it true? And right now it's kind of like, sure. And it's kind of sure both times. So maybe if you could, because it's the same thing twice, da, 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 you could be pretty confident and kind of, maybe we're leading them on, like, hey, maybe this could be true. And then the second time, maybe you could cast a little doubt and then kind of bring us to the darkness of the rest of the movement.
for what it's worth, and you can take or leave this, but I like to play the first one with kind of a confident open sound in first position, and then to go up to third position on the second one and do something different, maybe a faster bow speed, faster vibrato to get more of like a fluttery sound, but something to blow them apart. Yep.
Maybe just from that. Da, da, da.
This is the is it true part.
I would encourage you to not use the same bow speed for each fragment. So let's just briefly try to put some emotional impetus between your bowing distribution decisions. Which is a long way of saying da da dee. The mezzo forte version is more or less optimistic than the diminuendo version. More optimistic, what technically demonstrates optimism in your bow? More or less bow speed? Good. Okay, so then we have diminuendo, so we're going to use less bow speed. And then after the fermata, this is the most doubtful, right? Quite melancholy, actually. Can you use very little bow? And that helps us achieve a totally different sound color. And actually maybe feel like you're pulling the bow. You know what I mean by pulling the bow? Yeah, friction. Can we try those fragments one more time with that kind of level of bow distribution? Very good. Okay, good. That was much better. Did you guys think it was much better? I wasn't saying.
much
Okay,
better,
good.
yeah.
Definitely.
Great. One other thing about this opening. This opening teaches so much about how to play quartet because you have rhythmic unison that you have to work on. You have this chorale-like texture which exposes so much about intonation and how to develop a really great group sound. This is probably like the best part about playing string quartet is when you have that homogenized sound when you need it. And there are all different ways of practicing it. The number one thing I would say that gets in the way oftentimes is, well, there are two things. It's either the bow speed is different or the vibrato is too different. And also the intonation. So there are three things. But one way is to take out the vibrato first. And to really, that way you're really hearing the intonation very clearly, the placement of each note, it's very pure. And then you can really just concentrate on the bow speed and how you're developing that. So I think, do you have bar numbers? Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 11, can we go from bar 11? Yes, bar 11, and play it in tempo without vibrato, and just think about the bow speed matching for all of you, especially as you do the crescendo. Oh, okay, so intonation. hear lower three voices. And can you come with me to the back of the hall? We're going to listen from the distance. Okay, I think what's lacking is, this will fix it. Can you all play ponticello? Like really nasty right on the bridge. As squealy as possible. Okay, you need a little bit more bow speed than that, because what you want to hear, can I borrow your phone? You want to hear the high overtones. Those. And you want to imagine that all those high overtones are kind of coalescing together. This is how you're going to start to get the groups done. I need more viola. Viola. Don't press too much with the bow. Don't press too much with the bow. Just move it.
The bow speed, it's exactly as you would when you're not playing ponticello. You're just moving to blend the overtones, as Ryan is saying. Don't feel like you have to press even more.
There we go. Okay.
That was better.
Good. Now try as written.
And as you guys are playing non-vibrato, make sure your left hand stays loose.
Do it with vibrato. We have to skip a step because we're almost out of time, but do it with vibrato now and have the same feeling in your bow arm, but not on the bridge. Good, that's much richer. Very, very good. So basically, the reason I have him out here is that you should kind of do this when you're in a big space. Always have someone out in the back to give you perspective and to give very clear and quick criticism to them about what needs to be adjusted. What would you say is the number one thing that needs to be worked on based on what you just heard?
I guess maybe more blend.
More blend how? You have to be very clear.
Maybe I guess the
Vibrato, bow speed?
bow speed maybe more.
Bow speed, and you have to say viola was slower than second violin, cello is somewhere in the middle. Can you guys try to meet in the middle of all that? I would say personally that the vibrato wasn't really matching. Cellist has a tendency to use more vibrato than everybody else almost all the time. So you guys have to kind of mediate that. And also the intonation, you need to know who has the third in the chord. So I would analyze the opening so that you know who's the root and the fifth. The root and the fifth always have to line up because those are what kind of interval? Perfect interval. So perfect intervals have to sound perfect, right? And the third, you know about the major third? Major third can be slightly low. So for instance, the G sharp that you end on can be slightly low, but you have to kind of manage that within the quartet, but that can only be set up if the root and the fifth are in tune.
If I can just say one tiny thing, and we obviously don't have time to work on it, but through the Allegro passage, I would encourage you all to rethink a lot of the fingerings actually and stay as often as possible in lower positions. And it's 50% for clarity and resonance because as we go up the instrument, the string length shortens and the sound quality gets a little muddier. And then the other side of it is it'll be much easier to play in tune, also because of the clarity of the register. So especially inner voices and any melodic material that you guys need to pop out of the texture, like later in, just if you can just stay down for stuff like that. And as often as possible on that I know sometimes you have to shift, but on the ones where you don't have to, try to stay down and cross the string, never flipping strings between 16ths. But yeah, just food for thought.
Gosh.
Thank you guys.
Good job, Dave.
exceptional performance.
Wow.
Thank you very much for that. And that means a lot coming from us because we've played that piece like 100 times and it's hard not to be sick of it by now. But really, you renewed my passion for this piece, so thank you very much. It was really incredible. Anything that we say to you is not a reflection of something you neglected in the score. It's really personal preferences of ours. But maybe we could talk a little bit about your method to achieve this level of performance, which is really of the highest level. So maybe you could just walk us through a little bit of your rehearsal process. How long have you been playing this piece?
Yeah, we started at the beginning of the semester.
It's really, really great. And you've never played together before?
We started playing with each other last year a little bit.
Last year, okay. Yeah, you have some built-in chemistry, which is very obvious. It's great. How do you work on ensemble and intonation and the energy that you wield so well?
Drink a lot of coffee?
I'd say that maybe a lot of the work that we've been working on, this is definitely such an anxious and very sharp piece, so we were doing a lot of work on not making it like extreme or sharp for the sake of that. We were doing a lot of work with resonance, lots of sections to kind of explore more of the inward emotions in this piece, because it's very easy to just be so bombastic.
I'm intrigued. How do you work on the resonance?
Like for example, in the sections like the
Yeah.
we'll do like non-vid, very slow tempo, but still like I don't know, it's hard to explain.
We're trying to.
Sorry. Also, our coach, Julian,
Yeah.
he talked about pitch placement. So,
As opposed to intonation.
Yeah, as opposed to intonation. To like feel the harmonies more,
Mm.
and not just work on it for intonation.
Feel the emotional quality of the
Yeah,
harmony as
yeah.
well.
Good.
That's
Play
terrific.
into each other's sounds like,
Mhm.
by using pitch.
Yeah. Can you tell the audience what that means to play into each other's sounds? Like, is it a physical thing or is it more of a feeling thing?
Well, we imagine kind of like there's this little ball in the center, and it's kind of stupid, but sometimes before we play, we'll just imagine like putting ourselves in the center
Yeah.
and kind of like describing what kind of a sound we want here, like where it's going,
Yeah.
and kind of like what the colors, like for example in the second movement, which is a lot more like, I don't know exactly how to describe it, it's definitely darker, especially in the middle section. We imagine like the little ball in the center is kind of like made of tar or something like that. But I don't think there are many places in this movie where that happens.
So it's a little esoteric, but essentially what it means is that they have this commitment to one another that's very unified in each passage, and also that they're really feeding off of each other, not in their own worlds. And I think that's really the whole concept behind this metaphor. But we need those kind of things as musicians in order to describe the indescribable, really.
Michael Tree used to describe it as a fire that you fuel. All of you are bringing the wood to burn right here all together. I thought it was a beautiful image, and clearly I felt that passion really came across in the performance.
Now, just to some of our suggestions, really, you can take them or leave them. I think that the opening, this kind of tremolo motion can be even cleaner if you think about this idea of layering the articulation, that the thicker the string and the lower the instrument, the more articulation they need, and then as it goes up, maybe you've heard this before? Have you heard it before? As it goes up in register, that it doesn't have to be quite as articulate, and then you get the definition from the bottom, and it really kind of creates a very clear skeleton to the sound. And that's what we need. We need clarity more than anything in this opening.
It's essentially matching your sounds by actually doing slightly different things because your instruments are different.
Yeah, and I lose you a little bit in the balance at the opening, and I was noticing when you were playing, you kind of do the tea time bow hold thing. If you could really try to keep all of your fingers on the bow, I think we'll have a little bit more of you in the balance.
Try again, from the beginning.
excellent. So from a cellist standpoint, I'm always listening to the cello part. I think perhaps you may think that you're giving more articulation on these sforzandos than that's actually coming across. I kind of catch them, but I think you could do a little more. And I think it has to do with how much you also come away from them. Can you just play the opening just by yourself? Can you actually play the sforzandos here in the 5th bar? Right now you're going, you're leading into them, but can they be a little more surprising? So, can I just try for a second? Hold on. Sorry, can you try for a second?
Your microphone is making it super loud. Maybe. No? No, leave it. Leave it.
Typically still piano, right? Then a crescendo here. So a lot of the excitement really is in the restraint of this piece. And I would say my general comment, along with the fact that it was really excellent, is that I felt, particularly in regards to the tempo, I was looking through and looking at the last movement also. Last movement is what? What's the tempo marking for the last movement?
You can look, go ahead.
Allegro molto. And what is the marking for this one? Assai, yeah. So they should be a little different. I was thinking as we got to the end, like, how is the presto going to sound any faster? And actually, what came across is that it felt like yum ba da dun da da da, that we actually sat back in our heels instead of yum da da dun da 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 da. So maybe if you just fiddle around with what tempo you guys have decided, I think the lead up into that is just too fast because I saw the accelerando coming. Because play the accelerando right from the accelerando at the very end. Or before, whatever's easier. Yeah.
Okay, stop. This is about how fast you are, and I'll play the beginning.
So it's a little faster.
Yeah.
Sorry, a little slower
That's
than you guys actually reach a slower tempo.
Yeah.
The tricky part about the cello round, first of all, you'll have to rearrange the tempos. Either get the presto going really fast. The problem with the accelerando is it's hard to, you have to, restrain. You have to restrain yourself at first, and then like a slingshot, it has to go. So, but just play your part there. You're pulling everybody along there. He has the 8th note rhythm all throughout this.
And then keep the tempo. You got a good tempo going, but then you slow down at the very end. Yeah.
Do it one more time. It's one of those movements where you think you've given everything, and then at the end you have to give even more past that.
Yeah.
You should really, and as you guys did, you end it, and you just feel like you have to
Yeah.
fall off your chair. But then it launches you into the next movement. It really is just relentless.
Yeah.
Can you try that again before the accelerando? Really excellent.
Yeehaw!
So this is we have the same issue where we see the accelerando coming up, and then we start to speed up to meet it. You know, you see the exit sign coming up, but you don't immediately turn the car and then crash into the side of the road. You see it coming up, and you get the blinker going, and then, okay, now is the accelerando. So don't speed up, because then the accelerando is really powerful leading into it.
Do you mind if we go? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, just watch the sound quality. It's exciting, and I know you guys you talked about working on this, but making sure right at the end, in the accelerando, third bar, fourth, fifth bar, can you just play the last 3 bars of the accelerando slowly? This tempo. But with all the same character, just taking the tempo down, but keep everything in there. Okay, now a little faster. So always keeping that good sound quality. Sometimes we think, oh, I know we were kind of pushing you to get faster and faster and faster and really meet that presto tempo. But don't let the notes just become. There has to be the clarity, the same articulation as you're doing it now. Okay, let's put it into context now. Just right at the beginning of the cello, and really feel like. Sorry, what's your name again? Drew. Drew is really leading you guys, so lead and follow together. Yes, in tempo. No, but yeah, this is not together.
Excellent, guys. I'm curious to now go back a little, sorry, I don't have bar numbers, but from your pickup here.
Oh, yeah.
If we could start from your pickup. And this is a specific section where it can be very hard to pace ourselves because it's so exciting and so dramatic. But if it's double forte here, then we lose the impact of right on the presto at the end. So if we could start here, and I don't want you guys to lose any of your intensity or sound, just or like that burning feeling. So instead of the storm being right on top of our heads, maybe it could still be half a mile away, so it hits a little bit later. So could you start right on that and burn with the same intensity, but only forte? Still have, maybe in terms of the character, it still has like a defiant pride to it. There's still something upright and noble instead of pure rage, which I think maybe hits soon.
Yeah, it's upbeat to 267.
Oh, I see.
One thing here, these chord notes, if you sustain so much, you really will cover him because there's 3 of you and 1 of him. So release from that, and actually give it more energy. If you have lots of articulation in the beginning, then release, let it go.
Collective forte, so that there's a big difference between forte and double forte.
Yeah, so this is a half note. These are all quarters.
Interesting.
It's really deliberate so that he comes out there. Yeah.
I think this is a good mold. There's a couple places I think you are very intelligently, instinctively dropping it a tiny bit to give yourself more room, and I think you guys can go at that more.
I think
also.
all the half notes you sustain too much. Think always it's coming from the front of the note and let it go, and then when you want to create some contour in the half note to add for more phrasing, then that's fine. But dum bum ba bum bum, all of those have to, instead of ba ba. We had a teacher, Austrian teacher, who used to say to us all the time when we would play very sustained, like they would say, "You sound like foghorn. You go boom. You need to be like sound of bell, boom." So.
He also looked like a bell.
Yeah. So like the sound of a bell.
Watching. The way you played it before was one of the most exciting things I've ever heard, but I didn't feel this arrival because it had already arrived at the place where you're starting. So as exciting as this music is, and as much as we get carried away in it, because it's so gripping and crazy, you still have to maintain that voice in the back of your head, exercising restraint. Not emotional restraint, but technical restraint to make sure that all of the climaxes and drops happen at the right spot, because your level is so fantastic. Yeah. But I felt occasionally that in the fortes, it was so powerful that the moments where he delineates the biggest impact actually were not as proportionally big as they should have been.
Can I make another general comment? I think I may. Oh, thank you. It has to do also with the tempo, like Stella was talking about. I feel like when you guys want to make a very intense musical decision, oftentimes you rely on time as a tool. Yeah. And I feel like you can do more with the color changes, with the bow and the vibrato. And I think it applies, the biggest thing for me where it applied was the section right before this. And you guys almost, if I had to sit there in theory class and dictate this, I would have written molto rit and then an a tempo right when the sforzando or the forte pianos come back. And I'm wondering if we could try staying more in tempo and then rely on your colored pencils for the rest of it.
It's like the difference between when you hear a great performance that sounds like a revelation, and it's a revelation, but it fits within the lines of everything that the composer wrote, but because of the colors that they made, you think it's really amazing, as opposed to people who just take crazy liberties, and it's not written there, and then it becomes affected. It's totally a different kind of performance, and you think, well, that's different, and you leave the concert hall feeling, not that it was totally affected, but like Jeff is saying, try to adhere as much as possible to what the composer is writing. And if that really still doesn't, if you feel like you've tried everything and it's still not conveying the sentiment you want, manipulation of time, I think, is the last.
Last resort, for sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think somewhere around this.
Okay, there was a wrong note somewhere.
Oh no.
Here in these.
That's the wrong harmony.
Oh no, go play from here.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys didn't catch it. It's your job.
Yeah. It's actually the fault is on the others.
Well.
Okay.
Maybe if you had listened to one or two recordings, you might have heard that.
Sorry, even about the timing, if try once a little bit straighter time, your ensemble's really a little ragged here, and I think you can convey the same feeling without the time. Just change the color on the second, right in the moment. What I think your intention is all slightly different. Can you play? You have a very clear intention, and I don't think everybody's quite picking up on that. And then you guys can say if you don't agree. Can you just play it once? I think particularly the length of the eighth note, as you make that color change, is starting to. You're doing a very good job of maintaining it, but I think there's a little discrepancy. Can we try all together one more time? If you guys agree with this, everybody agrees?
Don't accent.
You want to make a
after
change?
This A flat.
Okay.
Don't accent the next bar. I'm sorry, I'm gonna be really picky just because you guys are so good. But don't drop that note just to prepare for that. You can do it. You're a good cellist. Da dee da P. Maybe you're on it up. Yeah, I found that you would set up things. Like I felt like you were preparing in an attempt to not set it up.
Yeah.
You actually create. We lost the surprise.
We know
so when you
something's coming.
slow down, da dee da dee.
Yeah.
Another thing though is you need to stay, you have this new thing coming up that's very surprising, but it's even more surprising if you stay committed in the moment to the very end of his last note, and then you even surprise yourself about when you start.
Yeah, and the thing about this piece, this is one of the last pieces Mendelssohn ever wrote, and he's very, in the Opus 44 quartets, he's very detailed with the markings, and there are some discrepancies in this, because he didn't have a chance to go back and revise it. There are some discrepancies between the exposition and the recapitulation, and for example, this time, in the exposition, he writes a diminuendo de pianissimo for you at the end of this, and this time he doesn't write the diminuendo. So you could, you could make the argument that
He died before you could change it.
Yeah, or you could make the difference. It depends on what side of the bed I wake up, but sometimes I do actually keep that, try to keep that strong, and that pianissimo is also a surprise.
And when we get to these forte pianos coming up and leading back into this final recapitulation motive, keeping in mind, at least for me personally, once again we have this like hot boiling storm, but maybe it's a mile away still when so incredibly surprising forte pianos, but still maybe with a lid over the boiling water. And then maybe growing, because there's 3 repetitions of the passing run, maybe there are more each time. But then when the recap comes in, it's to once again to leave yourself a massive amount of room for what's to come, but without losing any of the energy. Could we go one more time thinking about that? It's really one of the hardest things about this piece is the pacing, and to not lose the energy. We've been talking to other groups about how much harder you have to work while playing really quietly. Actually, it's a very difficult thing, but you guys are so good, you can do it.
But those are 3 the same? Exactly the same, the forte pianos.
Yes.
You need to make a...
I was planning on crescendo, but
I think that part of the key is that on the first one, it's a very difficult thing with all these 16th notes, but if on the first one there can be an immediate drop so that the second 16th note is close to piano, it's very easier said than done. Because that in particular will leave you more room to grow for the ones to follow.
Can I just discuss one other musical detail before we stop? And my group's kind of grown when I talk about this, but da da di da 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 dum. The sforzando at the very beginning. Dum ba da 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 da. What's the character of that? Dum ba da 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 di da. Yeah, and it's much more introverted than what comes before. What comes before is the craziest. It is so hard to make that turn right there, that switch in the character. And what I would encourage you to do is use your ears to listen out to the resonance in the hall, because you will play this in the hall, I'm confident, and a very nice hall. And listen to the ring, and at the end of that ring, then you come in with the next part.
when I bring it back.
Very good.
Almost, yeah. It could be even a little bit longer.
Could be even a little bit longer. We need to let the shock really set in. And it could be even more shocking right on that note. There's something fragile about it. If your bow doesn't speak all the way, it's not the worst thing in the world.
To me, and I'm cheating because I'm standing so close, but it looks a little bit as if you're telegraphing the next part as you're finishing the top note. You go da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, and you're already kind of falling into the next part. So this is something, and we do this a lot in rehearsal, really keep the emotional character all the way to the end, and then just take a huge grand pause while holding the tension, and then cue the next part. And then shorten the gap until it's, close enough to what the printed metric time value is. But sometimes we have to expand the rest so that it's really easy to get character all the way to the end, and then perfect character from the very first note, which is very hard to do in tempo, obviously. But in any case, in the rest, hold the character and nature of what came before for as long as possible, and then melt your muscles so you don't play double forte moving on to the next part.
I just wanted to say before we stop, what is the character that you guys are going for there?
Sort of like melancholy, reminiscing.
Sweet.
Sweet.
Can the vibrato, just when you guys ran it through, the vibrato felt very anxious, especially in the melody. And I felt like we didn't have a moment. This is the moment where you let the audience just breathe and just take it in. You're thinking about the memory of his sister, Fanny. He's remembering very fondly. I don't know if you guys, most of you maybe know the story about this. Do you guys want to just quickly synopsis of what happened when he wrote this?
Sure. So basically, Mendelssohn wrote this shortly after his sister Fanny died. She died while she was rehearsing one of his compositions, and it was like a fatal blow to him, figuratively and literally. And he went to Switzerland and kind of like went out of kind of everywhere for a second and just composed this. And it's probably his most emotionally driven work in a period defined a lot by classicism. So
Yeah, good.
Absolutely.
Very good.
Yeah.
And it's probably really interesting for you guys having just heard the Opus 13 quartet, which also burns really hot at moments, but it still has this elegance about how it's composed, even when it's angry and intense, where in this piece, he's done with that. Like Mendelssohn, you think of the octet, Midsummer Night's Dream, all of these, upbeat, positive, optimistic, even when in a minor key, and this is just pure rage, which you guys are capturing very well. We've been talking to groups all day about playing with more core and quality and towards the bridge. For me, the second theme actually was a little bit robust in general. So somehow finding ways, especially in the inner voices, of maybe thinning the sounds so that the melody doesn't have to dig and push a little bit, so that we get that sweetness. I think I got a little bit of that memory melancholy nature of the character, but I didn't quite breathe, because there's so many moments of this piece where I feel like you guys aren't supposed to be able to breathe. It's so intense. But then there's these moments where we need to be able to kind of sit back in the chair and recover a little bit.
And it might be a little counterintuitive, but these offbeats, I wouldn't play them so on the string. I would actually give them a little more articulation.
Well, it's on the string, but articulated very
Right.
clearly, yeah.
Yeah, and the same for you, Drew. Yeah.
But really excellent, guys.
Yeah.
It's really a pleasure to hear you.
Bravo.